Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And for this week's episode, we're going to go back to 2014 as we take a look at the big guy's 10th studio album, World Peace is None of Your Business. Now, before I get started, I feel compelled to make the most cliche statement in the history of mankind, that being that I cannot believe that this summer, this album is going to be 10 years old. To me, this record just came out just a couple of years ago. It seems as though time has just flown by in the past decade. I realize that the older we get, more and more that becomes the case. This is a record that came out, when it came out in July of 2014, this was a record that I was eagerly anticipating, as I do with every release by Morrissey. In particular, though, because I was such a huge fan, and I still am, of this album's predecessor, Years of Refusal. To me, Years of Refusal has always been, and probably always will be, one of my favorite Morrissey solo albums. It had been 5 years since Years of Refusal came out, when Morrissey released his 10th studio album, World Peace is None of Your Business. And like I said, Years of Refusal was a record that I just fell in love with basically the first time I heard it. That being said, I also was completely infatuated and have remained infatuated with Morrissey's other 2009 release, the Swords compilation album. So building off of the momentum, I thought, of Years of Refusal in 2009, which to me, at least if you ask me in my humble opinion, Years of Refusal is probably Morrissey's last classic album. Now, every album since then definitely has a lot of high points on it. But to me, Years of Refusal is Morrissey's last, classic start to finish album. It's an album that I just absolutely love, and I have, as I mentioned, from the first time I heard it. So when World Peace is None of Your Business came out, of course, I was extremely excited. I always am whenever the big guy has a new record coming out. I went out and I bought this record, of course, the day it came out. I could not wait to take it home and listen to it. And I have to tell you that my first impression of this record was similar to that of Ringleader of the Tormentors. This was a record that I was a little bit disappointed in when it first came out. Now, coming off of You Were the Quarry in 2004, I think my excitement level for, Ringleader of the Tormentors may have been a little bit higher than it was for World Peace is None of Your Business, because You Were the Quarry is one of my top 3 or 4 favorite records of all time. And I don't think that, Years of Refusal, like I said, I believe it is the last classic Morrissey album. But to me, it was no You Were the Quarry, and, very few records, even in Morrissey's catalog, are. But I remember I took this record home, I listened to it, and I was sort of immediately just kind of underwhelmed by it. It was a little bit disappointing. I was a little bit confused by some of the songwriting. I was sort of confused by some of, the directions that it went in. Now, this record is very unique. I think this is one of the most unique records in Morrissey's entire catalog. And I say that as somebody who is a firm believer that every record in Morrissey's catalog is incredibly unique to any other in the, in the collection. Morrissey never repeats himself. He never, does the same thing twice. But this record to me was something that it took a lot of getting used to. And I remember the year it came out, 2014, I listened to this record, on pretty heavy rotation, still trying to sort of figure out how I felt about it. At a certain point, though, this record just never really stuck to me. And it was kind of relegated to shelf duty for a long time. This was a record that for many years I didn't really go back and listen to very often. Actually, I'll say this record is going to be 10 years old in July, and this is a record I still struggle with sometimes. This is a record I still, I don't always know how I feel about it. I've been listening to it a lot, this past week, trying to sit down and write some ideas about it for this episode, and I've been listening to it this week more than I have in the last couple of years, to be perfectly honest with you. And this past week, I would say I'm starting to feel like I understand it more. Over the past maybe year and a half or 2 years, this record has sort of started to finally kind of grow on me. I mentioned this earlier on this channel when I talked about, Kill Uncle. Kill Uncle was another record that I bought it after it had come out. I wasn't a fan of Morrissey's necessarily when Kill Uncle came out. But when I first bought Kill Uncle, it was a record that I went back, I bought, as it existed, as it already existed. And it was a record that took a really long time for me to sort of figure out how I felt about it. It was much different than the records that I had purchased before it. But within a few years, I grew to where I love that record. Kill Uncle is now one of my, a record that I listen to all the time. I don't know if it's necessarily, one of my favorite records. It's probably in my, top 10, top 11 Morrissey records. But this is a record that even 10 years into its life, I sometimes don't really know, how I feel about it. And this was a record that when I ranked the Morrissey albums on the very first episode of this channel, this was a record that I ranked 18th out of the 19 albums I ranked, only ahead of Southpaw Grammar, which I will always maintain is probably my least favorite Morrissey album of all time. And as a part of that episode, I compared my rankings of Morrissey's catalog to an interview that Morrissey appeared on in the NME website, where he ranked his albums according to their catalog, and he ranked this record as his number one record in his entire catalog. And that is something that even today, as this record has sort of started to grow on me, and I feel like I've sort of, kind of embraced my relationship with it, that's a mindset I just can't even wrap my brain around. That anybody would, including the big guy himself, anybody would put this record as number one. I mean, you're talking about ahead of, The Queen is Dead and Strange Ways and Viva Hate and Bona Drag. I can't even imagine that. Now, like I said, when I did my Morrissey ranking at the beginning of this channel, this album was 18 out of the 19 albums I ranked. Because I've been listening to it so much this week, and I feel like I've started to understand it a little bit more over the past year and a half. It may have crawled up a couple pieces. I might actually take this record now over Ringleader of the Tormentors. I have talked to some people who think that this is one of Morrissey's better albums. I did talk to somebody a while back who thought that this actually was Morrissey's last classic album. And at some point down the road, I may end up feeling that same way. But as of right now, this is a record I still am kind of feeling my way through. This is a record that, of course, does not appear on any of the, the usual streaming platforms. This isn't on Spotify or Apple Music. That's something that, in a weird way, I kind of like about this record. I think it kind of adds to its mystery, at least in my opinion. This isn't an album that I usually just throw on in the car unless I'm willing to take, the CD down into my car, which I'm not usually, because they end up sitting in my car for a couple of months after that, and I like to keep my car, pretty spotless, if you don't mind. This was a record also, I think, if you go back and you look at it, this record just received very little promotion, hoopaloo, if you will, from the record company. I don't remember seeing, any advertising for this record. Now, obviously, Morrissey fans, diehard Morrissey fans, of course, knew this record was coming out when it did, but I don't remember ever seeing anything really to promote this record very much. I feel like this record was just kind of thrown into the marketplace, and from there it just sort of drifted away. I did see this tour back in 2014 in San Jose. I saw this at the San Jose Civic. And I have to tell you, of the shows I've been to at Morrissey, this was, for me, this was one of the lesser shows that I've ever gone and seen as far as seeing Morrissey live. He seemed to be, sort of not as interested in that show as other ones I've seen. Now, if you've ever been to San Jose, California, that's completely understandable. I mean, this is a guy who globetrots to the most exotic corners of the world. Milan, Rome, Paris, London, New York. So, yeah, the idea of coming to San Jose, California probably doesn't make him want to wet his pants. But to me, I thought the show was a little bit lackluster. I would say it was probably, if it wasn't the weakest Morrissey show I've ever seen, it was probably near the bottom. That being said, I thought the show was still good. I'm completely, biased when it comes to this. Anytime I get a chance to see the big guy, I am not going to complain about it. But, perhaps it was also because this was a record. When I saw this tour, live, it was a record that I was still very, sort of lukewarm on. This record was produced by Joe Cicerelli. I love the production on this record. This record, like I said, it's probably one of the most unique records in Morrissey's catalog. This record takes you in a lot of, sort of different directions. Of course, this record is famous for having a lot of Spanish influence, which I do like. I love the album artwork. This is probably one of my favorite Morrissey album covers. I pretty much love all of his album covers. Now, I don't have this record on vinyl. I don't really understand why I don't, but I don't, at least in this point in time. The one piece of vinyl I have from this era is I have this four-track single. I believe this was available through Hot Topic, if I'm remembering correctly. Mine's still sealed, hasn't been opened, but it has 4 tracks on it. It has World Peace, Istanbul, Earth is the Loneliest Planet, and The Bullfighter Dies. These were hand-numbered, I guess. Mine is number 610, so this is the one piece of vinyl I have from this era. The first song on this record is the title track, World Peace is None of Your Business. This song is okay. There are one of the arguments I've had about this record, or one of the sort of minor, grievances or complaints I've had about this record over the years, is that there are songs on this record to me are a little bit boring. And that's not something I often say about Morrissey's music. But there are certain songs that just kind of sit there. They don't really do much. They just kind of meander. And to me, the weaker songs on this record, I think that is the crime they commit. It's not necessarily that they're bad songs. It's that some of these songs are relatively boring. I would accuse the title track, World Peace is None of Your Business, of that crime, I guess. It's not the greatest song of all time. I don't think it necessarily is the best kicker to the album. I do like the lyric in this song where he says, each time you vote, you support the process. That's something I completely agree with. I have mentioned on this channel many times over the years that I do not vote. You would never catch me participating in such a useless activity, especially with the presidential election in this country in 2024, with the 2 candidates that we have to choose from. I mean, I've never really been a proud-to-be or patriotic American. But if these 2 numbnuts don't make you a little bit more ashamed to be an American than you already are, I have no idea what it takes. The second song on this record is a song called Neil Cassidy Drops Dead. Instrumentally, I really love this song. As I said before, I thought that the first song, the title track, World Peace, was a little bit boring instrumentally. I love this song instrumentally. This song makes reference to the relationship between Allen Ginsberg and Neil Cassidy. I love the lyric in the song where he says that Allen Ginsberg is hosed down in a barn. Thank you for that visual, Steve. Although you never know, Allen Ginsberg could have been out there, slopping around with the hogs, and he just had to hose off his galoshes before he went back into the farmhouse for a big country breakfast. But I assume that's not what this lyric is about. I assume this lyric is about Allen Ginsberg slopping around with somebody's hog. As far as I'm concerned with the whole, the whole beat thing, the whole beat writer scene, it's something that I'm, sort of remotely interested. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be more into it than I am for your benefit. However, if you do want to read an interesting book, I think, about the beat movement, I would check out this graphic novel by Harvey Pekar called The Beats. Harvey Pekar, of course, famous for creating what I think is the greatest comic book of all time, American Splendor. This, to me, is as good a book as any as I've read on the beats. I always find it more interesting to read books about the beat writers than it is to actually read the writing of the beat writers. I know you probably think I'm an idiot. You're not the only one. But to me, Harvey Pekar is as good a writer as any of the beats were. So I would definitely go back and check out this book, this graphic novel, and it's got amazing art all the way through it as well. So if you're really into the beats, man, we're just really into it. I know you and your friends go out in public and have those annoyingly loud conversations so the people around you are forced to overhear. And you talk about how you are just so into the beats, man. For me, yeah, they're okay. I actually prefer reading more about them than I do reading their actual writing. The third song on this record is I'm Not a Man. This song clocks in at a relatively rotund 8 minutes. Of course, it has about 2 minutes of, I would argue, somewhat unnecessary intro, but it's not bad. It kind of sets the mood for the song a little bit. As far as longer songs go, this one doesn't really bother me. This is another song, though, sort of like World Peace is None of Your Business, that doesn't really do much for me. I love Morrissey's voice on this song. This is vocally one of my favorite songs on the record, but I would accuse the song of not really doing much, just sort of sitting there and sort of meandering. I do sort of like the subject matter Morrissey talks a lot about, and I like the way he portrays the concept of traditional masculinity, the sort of warmongering, meat-eating hockey jock. I like the subject matter of this song. But as far as the song itself goes, it's one that, I could sort of take or leave, to be perfectly honest with you. The next song after that is a song that I love. Back on a high note with this one, the song is Istanbul. I love this song instrumentally. This song has sort of a 70s B-movie vibe. I love the instrumental track on this song. This song to me is about a young mother who dies during a childbirth. Somebody also, a few people have told me, and I've read a few different interpretations, that this song is actually about male prostitution in Istanbul. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with that. This is one of the best songs on the record, and if this song is sort of about male prostitution in Turkey, the instrumental track fits that fine. It's 70s B-movie, gay porno vibe. I'm totally into it. One of my favorite songs on the record, much better than I Am Not a Man. The next song after that is another one of the songs off this record I really love, especially instrumentally. This is Earth is the Loneliest Planet. To me, this sounds sort of like, electronic Spanish Zydeco. I really love the subject matter. To me, this song is about, growing up as an outcast. Watching the people around you, especially, for somebody like me who grew up as an outcast in high school, in a relatively small town, a town where I basically had, one friend. Together, he and I had no friends. And as you grow up, you hear your, classmates making plans for the weekend. going to dances, and, you were sort of left, kind of on the sidelines. For me, this is what it makes me think of is growing up as somebody who really didn't do a lot on the weekends. I usually was either hanging out with my one friend, Tim, and he and I were usually sitting in one of our bedrooms, debating over which Marvel heroine we would rather try to conceive children with, if you know what I mean. Whereas, you hear about your classmates, they're going to parties, they're going to dances. You come back to school on Monday, and everybody's laughing and reminiscing over the weekend, and you think to yourself, man, I was just sitting at home reading comic books all weekend. What's wrong with me? But eventually, if you are like me at least, you leave these places. It was a place I knew I was never going to stay. I had no design on living in that town as an adult. And as you spread your wings and leave this sort of closed off place, at least where I grew up, you eventually find your community, and you are no longer quite as lonely, at least, when you are around your peer group. Now, I'm somebody who, when I go out among the masses of society, I'm somebody who still feels relatively alone, especially when I go out and I, mingle around the ESPNers and the Fox News people that I live among down here in the southeastern part of the United States. But, it's not to say that I don't have my community of people as well. The next song after that is another one of the best songs on the entire record. This song is called Staircase at the University. Only Morrissey can create a song that is so danceable, and it's just so horribly morbid at the same time. This is a song about a young girl who succumbs to the pressure of academic performance put on her by her family and her closest friends. This is something, I can't really relate to. My parents, they didn't put a ton of pressure on me academically. Sometimes I wish they may have put a little bit more pressure on me academically. But, as long as I passed my classes and I wasn't acting like a complete twit in school, my parents were generally rather content with my academic performance. Sometimes I felt like my parents were so wrapped up in their own worlds that they didn't really have a lot of interest in what I was doing in school. But, I'm also fortunate in the sense that I did not have to grow up in a situation like this. I was talking to somebody one time about the show King of the Hill, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, and he was talking about the character Khan, who of course is Hank Hill's neighbor, and he was talking about the relationship that Khan has with his daughter Min on the show King of the Hill, and he was telling me that was how he grew up. That was how his parents were. His parents, he had to get just perfect report cards. He had to be involved in every extracurricular activity. He had to play 3 or 4 different instruments. He was always going and touring college campuses. That was his vacations. And he talked about the pressure of what it was like to grow up like that and have those expectations. And, the guy was successful enough, but he said that no matter what he did, even as an adult, his parents were always comparing him to like his cousin who was a little bit more successful or whatever. And so that's something that's foreign to me. I was never somebody who was put under that kind of academic pressure. Like I said, as long as my report cards were not completely putrid, my parents didn't really care that much as to what I did when I was at school. The next song after that is a song called The Bullfighter Dies. Another instrumental song I really like. This song is really self-explanatory. This is sort of, I always tell people this is sort of the 2014 equivalent to Meat is Murder. Not quite as good a song or as an epic a song as Meat is Murder, but it definitely gets, Morrissey's point across. I can't really think of anything, at least in terms of the animal world, that is any more inhumane than bullfighting. I think it's human nature, at least if you are somebody like me, it's human nature to always root for the bull. That's what Morrissey talks about in the song. This is, like I said, to me, this is Morrissey's 2014 equivalent to Meat is Murder. Not as good, but it's a good song, and instrumentally, I really love this song a lot. The next song after that is a song called Kiss Me A Lot. Sort of mariachi-infused indie rock on this one. I really love this instrumental track a lot. Again, I would say fairly self-explanatory. Lyrically, this song is pretty simple, but every time I hear this song, it just is one of those songs that just gets stuck in my head. Every time I hear the song, I've been listening to this record all week, trying to sit down and kind of come up with some ideas about it, and the song has been living in my being all week. It's probably one of the catchiest songs on the record, at least in that capacity. The next song after that is Smiler with a Knife. Again, not a song that I love, Steve. To me, this song is just sort of painfully boring, instrumentally and tempo-wise. And, I think that, lyrically, I think it's an kind of interesting sort of, concept lyrically. To me, this is a song about, somebody who smiles to your face but has a knife behind their back, sort of a two-faced smile. This is something that I do think is an interesting subject matter. I think it's, interesting fodder for songwriting. But to me, this is one of the weakest songs on the record. This is, to me, I was sitting down this week listening to this record on CD, purposely trying to, write things down about it, and I just couldn't. I had to fight the urge, just to skip this song as it was. I think everybody has known somebody like this in my song. I work in an industry. I'm not afraid to tell you that you meet a lot of people who are two-faced and dramatic and will stab you in the back for basically a quarter. So it's not something that I'm, completely unfamiliar with. The next song after that is a song called Kick the Bride Down the Aisle. I think Morrissey's views on marriage have been well documented over the years. I think this is one of the better songs on the record. This is a song that makes me think of when I was a kid. I grew up in a house. My parents married at an age that was probably too young. I think they were, my parents, I believe, were, met in high school, and they married way too young. They had kids way too young, and my parents separated when I was, I believe, in either middle school or very early high school. I don't remember at this point in time now, but my parents had a marriage that was just putrid. Our house was very chaotic. It was a very unhappy place to come home to after school, and I was one of those kids, and I'm not saying this to be unique. I'm not saying this to be different. This is probably not your experience if you were a kid, if you were a child of parental divorce. But I was a kid that my parents would get into these, marathon weekends of just sludge. It was something that it just wore me out after a while. And I was a kid. Now, I use the word pray strongly because it's not really what I mean. But I was a kid. I used to actually pray that my parents would get divorced. And when the news finally came that my parents were, splitting up, for me, I was actually very happy about it. I was very optimistic. I thought that this could be the start of brighter days in our family. Now, it didn't necessarily turn out that way immediately, but eventually I think both my parents ended up, better off. And for me, as a young adult, after going through that experience, growing up with my parents, I was somebody who was very distrustful of the concept of marriage, but at the same time, I was also somebody who was desperate to, end up in a long-term relationship. For a long time, I sort of jumped around from relationship to relationship. I feel like I was for a long time, I was sort of afraid to be alone. And I ended up in these really terrible relationships. And, for a long time, I used to blame my parents. Look at my parents' marriage. What kind of role models were they? At the end of the day, I had to realize that I was mostly the culprit in, sabotaging my relationships. But my parents' marriage was so rancid that I was actually one of those kids who, when the news came down that my parents were splitting up, to be honest with you, I couldn't have been happier. And I'm not just saying that to be the guy that says that. But for a long time, I was sort of, scared of getting married. I was scared of being in those relationships. Of course, I ended up in a bunch of them anyway. The next song after that is probably my favorite song on the entire record, and that is Mount Joy. This song was written about the Mount Joy prison in Dublin, Ireland. Instrumentally, I love this song. I think that this is probably the best song on the record. This is a classic Morrissey track. I think if you're going to go back and bring one of these songs off of this record into the live set once again, now of course in 2023 in Memphis and Nashville, at least down here in the 40th anniversary tour, Morrissey didn't play a single song off of this record. And to be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't something that I necessarily missed because there's just so much greatness in his catalog. But this song, Mount Joy, is a song that I would love to see live. He didn't even play Mount Joy live back in 2014 on this tour. So that's a song I would really love to see live. This song, the record ends with a song called Oboe Concerto. This song is okay. Sort of a minor piece of clunkage to end the record as far as I'm concerned. Kind of matches the first song on the record, World Peace is None of Your Business, as being a song that to me is a little bit boring and lackluster, kind of bookends the record. I think with a couple of, songs that are, not great. I love the lyric, though, where he talks about, there's a song I can't stand and it's stuck in my head. I'm trying to think of the worst two songs I've ever heard in my entire life. I think the worst two songs I've ever heard in my entire life. One is a song called Honky Tonk Badonkadonk, which is a country shit song by Trace Adkins. Sort of pop country hip hop. I don't even know what's going on there. I think the worst song ever made is Love in an Elevator by Aerosmith. So every time I listen to this song and I think of a song I can't stand being stuck in my head, it would either be probably Honky Tonk Badonkadonk or Love in an Elevator. Having either of those songs stuck in my head would just be like being waterboarded as far as I'm concerned. Now on this particular CD, this of course is the bonus edition. There are some bonus tracks on the second disc on this one. And ironically, I think some of the songs on the second disc are as good, if not better, than some of the stuff that actually made the record. That last song included, Oboe Concerto. I think that a lot of the bonus stuff is better than that song, especially, and even the title track, World Peace is None of Your Business. I think some of the bonus material is better than that. The first song on the disc 2 is a song called Scandinavia. I love this song instrumentally. It is epic. It's powerful. Like I said, this one is better than maybe a third of the songs that are actually on the record. Somebody told me that this song was about the rising crime rates in Scandinavia, like Sweden and Norway. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I do think it's interesting, subject matter. But instrumentally, I absolutely love this song. The next song after that is a song called One of Our Own. Another song that I think is better than probably half of the songs on the record. To me, this song is about losing someone very dear to you. And, the importance of the time that we have with the people that we love in our lives. Now, one thing this makes me think of is, living out here in the eastern half of the United States. All of my, family and friends are back on the West Coast, and that's something I didn't used to spend that much time thinking about. It was something that was just life. I move around. I live lots of places. You never know where you're going to find me from time to time. But as I get older, and especially as the people near me get older. That's something that I don't necessarily love. I don't love the fact that I live 2 time zones away from my dad. I don't love the fact that I live 2 time zones away from my best friend or my mom or my sister, my niece and nephew. So it makes me really cherish the time that we have. And, being close to my family is something that, is important to me. It wasn't necessarily, always, but it is something that is important to me. And it's something, as I said, as I get older, it's something that I don't love. Now, I'm not planning necessarily on moving back to California anytime, in the near future. But as I get older, it's something I think about more. This song also makes me think about my grandfather, who, I grew up with. I grew up in a town in Northern California, as I've said this before, but every summer, my siblings and I went up to Oregon and lived with our grandparents in a very small town in Central Oregon. My grandfather was somebody I was very close to as a kid. He was somebody that was one of my heroes. He was an Army veteran. He was a firefighter. He was just a tough John Wayne, man's man kind of dude. And it wasn't that he was macho. It wasn't that he was macho for the sake of being macho. It was a generational thing. He was, he grew up in Oklahoma during the Depression. That was just kind of who he was. And as a kid, he just basically walked on water. But as a young adult, due to some family drama, unfortunately, I lost contact with my grandfather for well over a decade. It was somebody I didn't get a chance to see because of all of this other chaos that was going on in the family that had nothing to do with him. But fortunately for me, about 5 or 6 years before he passed away, I was able to reconnect with him. It was something that meant the world to me the first time I saw him. I remember the first time driving up to his house, having not seen him in probably 15 years or something like that. I was so excited. I almost felt like I was going to have to pull over and, vomit on the side of the road. So it meant a lot to me that I got to spend the last 5 or 6 years with him. As somebody, like I said, as a kid, to say that he was important to me is just an understatement. Now, that's what the song makes me think of, is the fact that, we're all getting older, and I really don't love the fact that I only get to see the people that are most important to me, apart from my wife, maybe 2 times a year. But it really does make me value the time that we have. And like I said, it was such a tremendous gift in my life to be able to go back and reconnect with my grandfather for the last 5 or 6 years of his life. Now, the last time I saw my grandfather, he was just riddled with cancer. I think he died of cancer of everything. He was in so much pain that, I just basically wanted him to leave because he was in so much pain. He was basically literally sobbing one night. That was just not who he was. The next song after that is a song called Drag the River. Another song I really like. This one maybe not quite as good as, Scandinavia or one of our own. This song is about a woman who is in love with death. This song reminds me of somebody I knew when I was living in New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans twice for about 2 years total. I moved there the first time in, I believe it was 2012. I moved to New Orleans. And I met this girl through work, and she was a very sweet girl. Now, my experience in New Orleans was nothing nice as far as living there. I love New Orleans. New Orleans is one of my favorite cities. It's got so much cool history and music and architecture and food and drinks. And it's steamy and it's sexy and it's seductive and it's dark and it's mysterious. And I find all of these things very intoxicating about New Orleans. But having lived there, my experience of living there is, as much as I still love it, as much as it's still one of my favorite cities, it's just not, or at least it wasn't for me, a great place to live. And for me, I still struggle with this romantic relationship with New Orleans. New Orleans to me is like an abusive relationship because I just absolutely love it. And I lived there twice. And both times I lived there, it just totally kicked my ass. New Orleans is like this big bowl of chocolate. Like, it's like, man, it's so good, but it's so bad for you. At least bad for me. But I ended up working with this girl. Now, when I moved to New Orleans, I didn't do what I usually do. For a living, I ended up working in a bar. And this bar was pretty nasty. It wasn't, at the end of the road, but it was right next to the bar at the end of the road, if you know what I mean. This wasn't a place where people went in to drink and have a good time and, hang out with their friends. This was a place where if you see Bob walk in, it must be 4:45. People walk in, they clock in, and they're just there. They're sitting there, they're drinking for 8, 9, 10 hours. The place that was open on Christmas, people walk in Christmas morning. They're the type of people that can't understand why their parents don't, or why their children don't call them anymore. But I worked with this girl, and she was very sweet. She was very nice. She was very sort of easy on the eyes, but she was just an absolute disaster. She had really bad drug issues. She was an alcoholic. She was always in these situations with men where they were just treating her like garbage. They were taking advantage of her. They were robbing from her. They were stealing from her. And her life was just chaos all the time. And she was sort of one of the, one of the periphery people in my sort of, friend circle. And I'm not saying any of this as if I wasn't a mess. The first time I lived in New Orleans, I ran with a group of guys that people used to call the Lost Boys because we didn't exactly have our shit together either. But this girl was just, sometimes she was too much. And she would always would just bring a lot of chaos into our social circle. She was somebody who was always dope sick. She was always, going out fiending for drugs. And, she was somebody that eventually we all just kind of got burnt out on. She just was a lot to be around. I remember she even eventually ended up getting fired from this place we worked because she could not hold it together enough even to bartend in New Orleans. And that's what she used to say. She used to say stuff all the time. I'm just going to kill myself. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to kill myself. And after a while, a lot of us just sort of grew tired of her. We had our own problems to deal with. I remember I had, a bucket of problems I was trying to sift my way through at the time, too. And I remember the last contact I ever had with her was she had gotten fired. She sort of moved on from our social group where we sort of turned our back on her, if you want to know the honest truth. And she sent me a text message one night. I said, "Hey, are you still in NOLA?" And ironically, I was planning on leaving in a couple days. I was getting the hell out of there. And I said, "Oh, yeah, hey, what's up?" And she sent me this text message in response. It was like, she was obviously very inebriated. When people slur via text, you can tell that, oh man, like this person's fucked up. But she basically told me she was going to kill me. I better watch my back. She can make my life a living hell. And at the time I was like, fine, my life sucks right now. Kill me, bring it on. I embrace it. So a couple days, of course I didn't see her in those couple days. I was still in town, but I ended up leaving. And I went back to Seattle, and about a month later, I got a call from one of my friends, and I'm not going to mention her name, but he told me that she had committed suicide. I said, "Yeah, man, after you left, dude, it just got bad. She fell apart. She basically ran out of money. She totaled her car. She was with this dude who was basically robbing her. And she drove out to this place called Grand Isle in Louisiana, which is quite beautiful. And she took herself out, and it was something that, it really broke my heart. I've known several people over the years that have passed away, but for me, she was one of the ones that was the most tragic because deep down she was such a lovely person. I think she just had, she had so many demons. She's somebody I still think about every time I hear certain songs. She was really into like Guns N' Roses. That was like her big thing in life. And every time I hear Guns N' Roses, I still think of her. The next song after that is a song called Forgive Someone. Basically, this song is instrumentally, it's awesome. It's like Sinatra meets 70s Elvis. To me, this song basically is making the statement that the strongest thing you can do in life is learn forgiveness. That's been true in my experience. I think I've said before, I'm somebody who harbors, or at least makes an attempt to harbor, no bitterness when it comes to anything from my past. When I made that decision, I felt instantly 50 pounds lighter. The next song after that is a song called Julie in the Weeds. To me, this is like bonus material. This song is okay. Sort of a song you understand why it didn't make the cut of the record. It is an ultimate Morrissey deep track. In my opinion, actually, I always forget this song even exists until I bust out this CD a few times a year. The last song on this record, as far as the bonus material goes, is a song called Art Hounds. It's funny, I was just talking about New Orleans. The introduction to this song reminds me of a New Orleans phenomenon, and that's sort of the idea of the second line, which if you are familiar with New Orleans, if you've been to New Orleans and seen what a second line is, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it's something that's sort of hard to describe. My wife and I were actually living in New Orleans my second time, her first time, and my second time living in New Orleans. Although it wasn't great, it was much better than my first experience down there. We lived down there when Prince died, and we lived in a neighborhood called Treme, and right down our street, the day that Prince died, they did this just amazing purple-themed spontaneous second line. That's something in New Orleans that if you have ever seen, you understand what it is. If you haven't ever seen one, it's really hard to explain. But it's funny, I've been going through, maybe it's a midlife crisis thing I'm going through right now. I don't know what it is, but I've been going through this thing lately where I'm just like really like missing New Orleans. I don't know why. I've been rewatching the show Treme, which was a show on HBO, which was filmed like right after Katrina. It's funny because I know that New Orleans is not good for me. There's something about it. Anyway, man, that is Morrissey's 10th studio album. World Peace is none of our business. None of your business, I should say. To me, it's a record that, I'm still, even 10 years into its life, it's a record that I'm still, trying to discover how I feel about it. Having spent a lot of time with it this week, I'll say that I'm feeling pretty good about it right now. Now, after I finish filming this video, I'm sure it will end up back on this shelf right here, which is my Morrissey shelf, where it may, collect dust for a few more months. It's not a record I go back and listen to every day, especially like I said earlier. It's not on any of the, Spotify's or Apple Music's. So it's something that never really comes on in my car. It's something I have to make a conscious effort to go and listen to, but it's something that I should make a conscious effort to go back and listen to more often. I've actually really been enjoying it this week. I've actually probably been enjoying it more this week than I have in its entire life. Like I said, for me, this was a record when it first came out that, left me feeling a little bit disappointed. I love a lot of the musical direction on this record. I like a lot of the sort of interesting and, diverse musical influences. So go and check it out. Let me know what you think of it. Is this a record that to you is high up in Morrissey's catalog, or is this one that would rank a little bit lower? To me, when I ranked Morrissey's catalog, this was only ahead of Southpaw Grammar. It may have moved up a couple since then. Who knows? Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. If you enjoyed this video, check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.